Well, thank you both Alexis and Sasha for the invite. It's great to be here, and as you will probably pick up very quickly, I think there are two groups of scholars here. Some of you are working directly on the central concept, and others are approaching it more from an adjacent field. And I'm definitely in the latter group, and I think I'm also in the larger group. And that's a good thing, because it gives me the opportunity to rethink some of my existing work through a new lens, and I hope I can also contribute something of my own field into the overall idea of what to achieve as a larger group. And I think what I'm really will try to achieve is to show how, and I'm picking up here on a number of ideas I had in our conversation with Alexis and Sasha, but also from their extended concept note, is how to combine in a way the individual level and the social level, right? And not necessarily to say I am working in one of the two, but really how can I combine it and why is there value in doing so? And secondly, again, trying to combine the qualitative and the quantitative. This is not to say this is the way to do it, this is just my own way of combining those two, and then other people do it differently, can comment on it and so on. What I'm going to focus on today is on conversion as a personal transformation. So I'm talking about people who are leaving one faith to embrace another one, or to become atheist. And I'm going to touch upon why it is often so difficult. Why do the act of conversion, why does that create in the people around it, in the previous community, in the wider society, or why is this unsettling act, why is there almost like a kind of fear, why do feel people threatened by it? What I'm not going to talk about today is looking at a specific trajectory. So I'm not going to talk about a specific denomination that becomes secular or a specific denomination that adopts another religion. But I agree this is very valuable research and a lot more on that is needed. Neither will I actually delve into the exact process that takes place when one converts, when one has a religious personal transformation of that extent. Again, I think there's a lot more research needed to understand the exact process, the exact mechanisms, both at the individual level for what happens in the group around it. Rather than that, and here comes the social, what I'm going to look at is what are the governmental restrictions, and on the one hand, and what are the societal pressures in a society that either enable or facilitate conversion, or actually quite often, of course, the opposite, what makes it much more difficult. Why is it such a big thing to convert from one religion to another, especially when we're looking at the societal pressures? And I'm going to adopt a kind of cross-cultural approach, so I'm going to look at what are the differences between societies in adding those restrictions and pressures, and also what are the similarities there. What I'm talking about today is actually part of a larger project which focuses on the evolution of religious tolerance through the ages. And I'm interested in two things. Firstly, that is establishing what is the basic causality. So often, I think the vast majority of scholars agrees that there is a strong link between religious tolerance on the one hand and having peaceful cohesive societies on the other, but the exact causality between the two is still very much subject to debate. And if I summarize it very crudely and cutting a lot of corners, you have a lot of scholars who say, well, once you have a resilient society that is peaceful, of a certain level of prosperity, it's okay for you to believe what you want to believe. There's another group of scholars that says, no, hang on, it's the other way around. It is, if a society experiences religious tolerance, including the right to convert, this actually then triggers, after a suitable period, and that's obviously an area I'm going to come back to, a more resilient, peaceful, cohesive society. Probably more for the question and answers. The context why I'm interested in these things is actually that of the development world, and basically I was asked at some point a few years ago to delve into more a test of value for money, of freedom of religion, of belief initiatives funded by a whole range of funders. Right, but before as in a way a first step, I want to step back a bit, and I think this doesn't seem to do much. So if someone else can just press maybe the button at the computer. So if you can go to the next slide. Sorry about that. Or do I need to switch it on? Okay, so this was in a way, sorry, I've forgotten I had this slide. This was in a way summarizing up that puzzle of religious freedom and cohesive societies. This kind of, where does the arrow of causality go? If you go to the next slide. It should work, now let me try. Yes, it does, thank you. So the first thing I need to point out, and that's in a way a step back, that I'm originally trained as a historian, and I'm in a way a methodologist on how to write world history in a quantified way. So that is, well, fortunately or unfortunately, depends on how you look at it, what I do most of my days. And really what I'm trying to do, and I do that mostly through my Seshat Global History Data Bank project, which I set up with 2 colleagues in 2011. And as you can see from the slide, I'm not going to read it all. It's basically a web of facts that is open to statistical analyses, and it allows you to connect very different societies, and I will talk to you about that in a minute, spatially, temporally, thematically, conceptually, right? And the main thing is that it allows you to test social sciences theories with historical data, and including theories pertaining to religious tolerance and conversion. So I'm going to walk you very quickly, just in a few minutes, through some of the methodology here, so you understand where I'm coming from, how I approach that theory of religious tolerance. And in a way, and I'm going to not make many friends by putting it as crudely as I do, and that is, if you talk about many historians and you put in a certain social sciences theory in front of them and say, like, do you think that has traction or not? They will think and say yes, because I know a very clear example that is the ultimate proof on it. Then obviously you push back and say, well, hang on, what is the representativeness of that, and so on and so forth. And then obviously these people are extremely well read, and they can put 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 examples. Some of them go to 10 or 12 examples and so on. But regardless, at some point you reach the point in which the examples stop, and ultimately speaking, you still have the issue of saying, well, how representative is this of the human species as a whole, of all the periods we're talking about? Is it just cherry picking some example? So, for example, in monographs on world history, you still read very often a cherry-picked narrative starting somewhere in Mesopotamia over Egypt to Middle Yellow River Valley to medieval Europe and so on. And you think, well, what happened in all the other places at that same time, and how do you balance that, right? So that is the bigger problem I wanted to grapple with. So the first thing we did was we said, well, obviously we need data if you want to analyze it statistically, but data on what? So we decided to code and gather data for 2,000 variables, including on religious tolerance, which are probably 60, 70 of these variables, for each year since the Neolithic Revolution till today. And we do that for as many geographic locations in the world. Obviously, if you need to start somewhere, we decided to keep the long durée view very much in place, but actually cut down drastically on all locations and focus in the beginning on 30 locations. So to diversify, in a way, the variability of our data, we said we will use the UNESCO division of the world in 10 world regions, and that's the most left-sided column: Africa, Europe, Central Eurasia, and so on. And for each of these world regions, we're going to look at 3 distinct time series. One where social complexity, which is a concept from anthropology, arose early, and these are the usual suspects, like, as I said, Mesopotamia, Egypt, Middle Yellow River Valley, and so on. One where it arose very late, and one which is probably not the most scientific way of putting it, somewhere in the middle, But that as a result, we felt we had a basic sample which captures quite a bit of variability in how humans have evolved and interacted over time. Now, once we have that, this is just a slide to show, we then put a time series together of all societies or polities that held that piece of real estate at some point. So for ancient Egypt, well, basically for the Egyptian time series, we have 35 of these successor polities. For, let's say, Big Island Hawaii, we only have 4 or 5. So the time depth and the shallowness of how far we go back, obviously it differs very much. So what is in our code book? We have a lot of data on social complexity, warfare, ritual, religion, and religion is especially on religious tolerance, agriculture, and so on and so forth. And if you add that all together, we're talking about approximately 2,000 variables. And this is just as an example of one of these facts. Here we are coding, let's say, for Egyptian New Kingdom Ramessid period, the population in the capital. You will see it is a range. So we do not impose false precision on it by saying, oh, it is so much. No, we not only can we cover a range, we can also record levels of uncertainty and levels of disputedness amongst historians on it. And obviously our data can be continuously updated. So if there's new publications coming out, we are updating that data. And by now it is actually, we have had 19 grants who worked over the last decade on this. So, and that's with a team of well over 500 historians and including, let's say, between 25 and 30 staff members at some point. So it is a very big project by now. And so that includes not only modelers and statisticians, but also computer scientists, archaeologists, historians, and so on. Right. In terms, so where are we now? I spoke to you about 30 time series. By now we're actually at 42, 43. We have way over 500 polities, and together that means they already encompass more than way over half of all the humans that were ever alive, 1,500, 2,000 variables, and so on. Now, religious tolerance is just one example. If you if you go back to the puzzle of religious tolerance and freedom of religion or belief that I presented in the beginning, you will see that the current studies on this question are divided. Quite a lot of people say, you know, the arrow of causality goes in one way, the other one goes the other way. And very often I feel the biggest reason why the studies are so divided on it is to do that they're basing their conclusions on very time-shallow data. So it is usually a few years of survey data. And obviously, if you have in those years a major war included, things start to shift dramatically compared to others. So in my view, the best or the most comprehensive study that looks at it is just over 20 years. But most of them are actually down to a few years, a handful of years, which makes the data very sensitive to changes. And, you know, things change all the time. So as a result, the current debate about the value of religious tolerance on societal well-being and also on, you know, and as you will see in a minute, on conversion as well, is very much a debate, an unproductive debate between two camps who say tap on, tap off. Basically, we should always support religious tolerance and trust us after some time you will see the benefits accruing. The other side saying, well, actually, we don't see any evidence for the added value of it. So what I have done is by my approach having a lot more time depth to it, so I can look at the deep drivers, but especially I can then look at when basically I can change the question from is there a tap-on, tap-off debate, is that really what we're in, to is there a Goldilocks moment? If you look at the life cycle of civil war and at the life cycle of societies, is there a specific moment that you can identify that you say, well, actually increasing awareness about religious tolerance, the right to convert, etc., you know, basically the human rights agenda to a large extent and Article 18. Is there a Goldilocks moment here that you say, if we invest now, here we can expect much bigger return on our investment compared to just the average, right? So that is the bigger question. So I try to shift the debate away from always to never to a Goldilocks moment. And as you will see, these are variables that I adapted from a range of existing studies, right? So I didn't say I'm going to use a totally different methodology because then I don't add very much to the existing field. Instead, I said, well, can I tweak the existing variables a little bit so that they actually work and help me understanding that they work for past historical societies. And yes, they go in a way in government restrictions and societal pressures or restrictions, but more important in a way, they break down in 3 categories as well. So we have, let's say, heavy variables, which point at almost full-blown civil war. And if you see evidence of that, you say, well, there is civil war. Well, that is helpful, but not too helpful in a way, but nevertheless, we want to have those in, Secondly, we have much more light variables where you see, well, is there a low-level violence against religious heritage? What's the frequency of that? When does it start picking up? Because usually those things are before a full-blown civil war. And that's in a way much more useful if you want, like I want to do, is use those historical models to develop early detection mechanisms from, right? So at least they give us a more of an advanced warning of those. And thirdly, there are a third category of variables is more conditioning or shaping variables. So, and this is the category where you can see, are there any government restrictions of conversion? This is not saying suddenly it is there. No. Are there already restrictions? And if then other of these variables, the red light starts to flicker, do we really need to get worried or not? Or if these shaping conditions are not there and you suddenly see a very low level of violence against religious heritage, maybe we are more confident that this will not blow up entirely, right? So those 3 variables, types of variables, I am trying to unpack. So in what I'm thinking of is to look now at conversion or very deep personal change, as in, is this allowed? This is a shaping or a conditioning type of variable. And as I said, what I hope to do, or basically by now we have 500 historians who have contributed to data. So the data gathering is finished. What we're doing now is liaising with them further to have sign off on the quality of the data, because probably what I do need to tell you is that we're not just scoring yes and no's and so on. We also have a explanatory paragraph actually explaining why we think it is that we can code it. So if someone else comes along and said your paragraph is wrong, we update the machine readable or the statistical data. We also link it then with references, and we collect those PDFs as well. So in the total volume of PDFs at the back end of that is 155,000 already. And then what I'm not going to talk about today is we're also very reluctantly, or with a lot of caveats, I'm already deploying some large language models and helping actually to, if a new publication comes along, can we update the code, or can AI actually generate updates to our code base, simply because it is incredibly expensive to do this manually. And it would be helpful if we have a machine who can say, we think this new publication means you need to at least have a look at those specific pockets of variables, and then we can run that through our expert base. Now, I'm using this ultimately to develop a historical model and also tools about early detection. And we're in this phases now, although the data vetting hasn't been fully finished. We're already looking at basically, do we have enough statistical power, etc., etc. So we do already some preliminary tests, and what we are seeing is that, which will be no surprise in a way, but it's the light variables and the shaping ones which have the bigger traction, because the heavy variables are just measuring what everyone knows and can see. But if we are interested in actually prevention, which that is why I'm doing this, it is the focus on these light and shaping variables is important. And that, the conversion one and is very much there in the game. Secondly, it is not a single variable seems to carry, in a way, all the explanatory weight. It is very much a story of all the boats rise at the same time. And So also because of our data is often patchy or uneven or not complete for our societies, it is in a way comforting to know that if they push towards the same trend, that if you are talking about certain societies where you have a very incomplete data set, you can still have some confidence that you can read the signal as you can read it. So what I hope I have done by giving a very short whistle tour in a way to my approach and this specific project and how it links with conversion is definitely I want to have brought in the message that this is adjacent to the core questions that Sasha and Alexei have put to all of us. But nevertheless, I'm going to try to link it back. And this is what I've done yesterday when I read the concept note again. I'm going to try to link it back to the 4 challenges you posed to us, or the 4 dimensions you identified. The first one is theoretical. The theoretical dimension, you said, what is personal transformation? Now, my work and work of colleagues and so on has in a way little to contribute to that. So that's if immediately my hand goes up. What I mean it is, what you try to unpack, we just take in my approach as a given, right? So we assume conversion is a personal transformation, and whatever the exact mechanism, whatever the exact very specific consequences for the person himself or herself, I just accept or I take as a starting point that it is transformational. My work will have nothing to contribute to that and said, oh, we're talking about this psychological mechanism over another, etc. The second challenge or question you posed was, what is the historical dimension? And basically, when is it triggered? And here I feel the examples you gave were, I mean, on the one hand, you looked at the individual level, where I could follow you very easily and say, like, oh, I can see what is a personal transformation. But the examples you gave on the social level, and I'm thinking now, you refer to the Mao's Cultural Revolution, the fascist Nazi change and so on, that I think there is value in doing that, but this is obviously, in a way, cherry-picking those moments with extreme transformation on a societal level, which you hope to link on a personal level. I then found, in a way, my approach as complementary to that one, where you, so in addition to using a case study approach, you say, well, actually, what I'm interested in is looking at the more fine-grained levels of difference. Basically, is there a societal transformation? My approach can provide evidence for that. Is there a little bit of societal transformation, or a lot, or extreme, and so on? And I think any explanatory framework you will put together will probably have to grapple with a model or a theory which works at all those levels and not simply at the most extreme case studies, but also explains instances where it doesn't happen, right? So that I would definitely say this larger comparative fold has value there, I hope. Third dimension or challenge you put, what are the methods? What is the methodological dimension? How can we measure it? Well, seemingly my methods are very crude on one level because I ask simple questions which answer yes or no or absent present, and yes, we can have some information on frequency and levels of uncertainty and so on, but you can say hang on, the whole complicated process as both personal and societal transformation you capture in binary variables almost. This seems crude, so hands up, yes, it is crude. However, what we do by, you can easily then put together an index either for religious tolerance as a whole, or linked to conversion, or government, or societal. By combining different variables and having almost a web of causality, you can actually supersede the crude binarity which lies at the bottom of that by composing it, by aggregating it. So I would say have a think about, that avenue of as well. And then the fourth challenge you put to us was how does it link to applied work, right? And there your own examples were very much on the institutions, let's say prisons, schools, I believe you mentioned as well, and so on. There I would say, well, what I do and what a lot of people in my field are doing is not looking at those side of institutions, but more on the development world. And I think, so as a result, I see my own work very, very much as applied and actually contributing to early detection mechanisms and so on. So the appliedness of a focus on conversion and so on can come in many forms. You can look at it perfectly valid at an institutional context. You can look at it more almost as a development as well. Ultimately, this comes down, and I think that was actually the key question of your concept note, is can we assume it is beneficial, those personal transformations, right? And obviously what I'm doing is looking at conversion, which comes from a human rights angle, Article 18 as well, where it's just written in the right to convert to other faiths or no faiths. So from that human rights angle, the assumption there is very much, yes, it is beneficial, right? Obviously, everyone who works in the human rights angle knows that the pushback against the human rights agenda over the last 2 decades has grown quite a bit. So if you would have asked that question, let's say in 1950, everyone would have said yes. By now, it is a lot more confused, the answer, or varied. So I would say what I try to do is one way to engage with that, with those 2 strands of thought, and the human rights one and the pushback as well. I think I'll leave it at that, but happy to answer questions and also make stronger links with the Metanoia framework you use.